My name is Glatt. I'm honored to participate in this Shema B'Kol project for refuah shelaima for Sara Rivka, Sara Rivka bas Mindel. May in the schus of all the learning that's being done on her behalf, may she have a refuah shelaima. At the time that this program will be aired, it also is the sheloshim for my mother-in-law, Esther Ettel, by Zalman Yosef, Esther Korn, Ethel Korn. And I hope that this will be an aliyah for a nishmas as well. Esther is the subject really of this kapitel. Very appropriate kapitel, Lila Nishmas, my mother-in-law, but also an extremely appropriate kapitel for this time of the year and for the refuah shelaima for Sara Rivka. This Mizmor Chav Beis, kapitel 22 in Tehillim, is a beautiful kapitel, which is an impersonal note, David HaMelech calling out to Hashem from the depths of his despair, and at the same time also represents Klal Yisrael calling out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu from the depths of their despair at the time of Megillas Esther, the time of Purim. And the Gemara in Yuma says that this kapitel is really all about Esther Hamalka and about the troubles that she had, the risks that she took, and yet the beautiful outcome. The kapitel can be broken up into a number of parts, and it starts off with the darkest time for Klal Yisrael, for David HaMelech, and it progresses calling out to Hashem, beseeching Hashem to help us, recognizing that Hashem is truly the only way that we'll ever be saved from any tzara or trouble. And then Baruch Hashem, as the kapitel comes to its conclusion, thanking Hashem for saving us, and recognizing that Hashem will always save us. Hashem is our Yeshua. We just have to beseech Him for it. This kapitel begins with the words Lamnatseach al Ayeles HaShachar Mizmor LeDavid. What is this Ayeles HaShachar? A number of the commentaries have different interpretations, all are very similar in nature. Some say the Ayeles HaShachar is a musical instrument. This musical instrument plays a beautiful song, starts off quietly, starts off slowly, but ultimately builds to a crescendo. Just like this kapitel of Tehillim does, just like our beseeching HaKadosh Baruch Hu does. We start off softly, we're in the midst of our tzaros, our despair, and we look to Hashem, we reach a crescendo when Hashem saves us. Others explained, Medrash Socher Tov and others state that the Ayeles HaShachar over here is a reference to the darkness right before dawn. Nighttime. Nighttime is always a euphemism in Klal Yisrael for the difficulties that we have. Many times in Tanakh, in phraseology in the Gemara, we use nighttime to refer to points in our history or points in our lives that are very difficult. But we always remember that there's a dawn. We always remember that there will be, Im Yirtzeh Hashem, a salvation that comes. Another interpretation, however, is Ayeles HaShachar is a hind, a type of deer. And that's the interpretation I'll focus on from the Gemara. Lamnatseach al Ayeles HaShachar Mizmor LeDavid. So the Gemara in Yuma says, Loma nimshalo Esther le'ayola. As I said, this kapitel of Tehillim is a reference to the Purim story to Esther. Why bedafka? Why specifically was the allusion to a hind, the type of deer, utilized over here? So the Gemara gives a reason and explains it, and it says, V'chaviva al balo kol shah v'shah. Because there's a special relationship between the husband and wife deer, between the male and the female hind. That is a reference over here to Esther saying, I'm giving up everything by going into Achashverosh. As the Psukim tell us in Esther, she's willing to give up everything to save Klal Yisrael. She's married to Mordechai. Now she's going into Achashverosh voluntarily. She no longer will be able to stay with Mordechai, but she'll unfortunately have cast her lot with Achashverosh. And she says, I'm willing to give it all up to help Klal Yisrael. So that's one of the reasons why it's referred specifically over here to a hind. Why bedafka called Ayeles HaShachar? So the Gemara says, Lo maloch, to teach us, Ma shachar sof kol halayla av Esther sof kol hanisim. The story of Esther ends an epoch, a period in Jewish history. It is the conclusion of the Torah Shebichsav. Esther is the last of the books, chronologically speaking, that is written down, the 24 Kisvei HaKodesh, the 24 books of Tanakh. Esther is the last one to be written down. It represents an important point in our time that closes off a certain closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And from Esther and onwards, there's a certain hiddenness. Esther really refers to an illusion of hiddenness, nistar. We no longer have that open, close relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We no longer have nevuah. We no longer have direct links to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But instead we rely more upon tefillah. Instead we rely more upon our emunah. And Esther represents that as well. This represents the end of a period of time. And finally, the Gemara says, Lama nimshlu tfilosim shel tzadikim k'ayeles. The Gemara in Yuma and Daf Chav Tesam and Aleph continues and says, why are the tfilos of Klal Yisrael referred to as a hind over here? They're compared in some way to ayeles hashachar. Teaching us a very important point, the Gemara says, Kol zman shemagadeles karneha mavtzilos. As long as the antlers, so to say, of this hind are growing, and they branch off and they grow further, av tzadikim kol zman shemarbim betfila tfilos nishmas. As long as tzaddikim are going to go and daven, as long as they pray to Hashem, as long as they continue to pray, even despite the difficulties, even despite the fact that the tefillos are not sometimes answered as we would ideally like, HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves those tefillos, and we're compared to a hind with its growing antlers at all times. The next verse in the kapitel says, Keli, Keli, Lomo Azav Toni. Pasuk Beis, Esther's crying out. The Gemara in Megillah says, Esther is crying out and saying, Hashem, why have you forsaken me? The Gemara says she was standing outside Beis Hamelech HaPnimis. She's about to go into Achashverosh. And it says, Omer Rab Levi, Kivon Sheyagiel LeBeis HaTzlomim Nistalka Imenu Shechina. She was in the midst of all this tumah. She was in the midst of all the Avodah Zarah over there, all the idols. And she sensed that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had left her. And she cried out, Keli, Keli, Lamo Azav Tani. Why, Hashem, have you left me in my times of distress? And she says, maybe you're upset at me because now I'm doing this b'mezid. I'm intentionally going into Achashverosh. I'm going in, so to say, on my own free will. And that's why you're upset with me. I don't have a choice. I have to do this for Klal Yisrael. And then she says, interesting, she says, maybe you're upset with me. Later on in the kapitel, it says, Shema al shekurosiv kelev. She refers to her enemy as a dog. That's not right. Haman is a king. He's a viceroy. He's a very important man. Maybe you think it's a lack of cover that I refer to him as a dog. So she changes in the next kapitel. If you look at Pasuk Chav Beis, in Pasuk Chav Beis, she refers now to him, Hoshieni mipi Aryeh. In Pasuk Chav Aleph, she says, Miyad Kelev Yichidosi, save me from the dog. But maybe it's improper. Even our oppressors, we shouldn't refer to them as dogs. She said, save me from the lion. Others explain that verse in a different way. The dog is a reference to Haman, and the Aryeh is a reference to Achashverosh. Lest you think that this is only all about Haman, the Gemara tells us that Achashverosh was also a Sonei Yisrael. Achashverosh's name was Chosh Birosh. Whoever heard him, they got a headache. He was a terrible person. In fact, Chazal tell us in the Medrash that when Achashverosh asked her, who is this person that is going to go and try to wipe you out? She was about to point to Achashverosh, and the Malach came and pushed her hand and pushed it to Haman. Achashverosh was the lion. He was the head. Haman was the Caleb. He was the dog. Both of them were Rishoyim, and she davened to Hashem to save us from both. The Gemara in Megillah on Daf Dalet gives us an additional insight over here. The Gemara says, Chayav Adam Likros es ha-Megillah b'layla v'lishnosa b'yom. Person is obligated to read the Megillah both at nighttime and then to repeat it again in the daytime. This is both for men and for women. There's an obligation to read the Megillah twice. This is based upon the pasuk in this kapitel, the third pasuk in the kapitel, where it says, Elokai ekra yomam v'lo saneh v'layla v'lo dumioli. I will call out to you in the nighttime, and if you don't answer me, I will call out to you again in the morning. We constantly have to daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not enough to daven one time to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm done. I davened. We constantly have to repeat our davening. We have to repeat and repeat and repeat. Moshe Rabbeinu v'es Chanan 515 times he davened to go into Eretz Yisrael. We constantly have to understand that we're not bothering HaKadosh Baruch Hu when we ask for various things in our lives, for refuah shelaima, or we ask for parnasa, we ask for whatever we're asking for, small things or great things. We can't bother HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to say, kavayachol, yearns for our tefillos. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sometimes gives tzaddikim difficult times because he wants them to daven. Therefore, our job to follow David HaMelech is to daven. David HaMelech's greatness was he davened to Hashem in times of despair. It's very easy to daven to Hashem when you win the lottery. Oh, thank God, you're great to me. You go into the winning locker room at the Super Bowl, everybody's praising God. Everybody's saying, oh, God granted us this victory. What happens when you go into the losing locker room? What are they saying over there? Unfortunately, many times they're yelling at God. They're blaming God. That's not the way David HaMelech looked at things. That's not the way a Yid is supposed to look at things. A Yid always yearns to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he recognizes that our tefillos aren't always answered in what we think is the answer, but they're always answered by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They're always listened to by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And they're always preserved and held in special places. There's a special otzar. There's a special storehouse in Shemayim where all these tefillos, all these tears that are cried are collected. They're precious to Hashem. Hakol b'dei Shemayim chutz mi yiras Shemayim. The one thing that Hashem, so to say, doesn't make is yiras Shemayim. So when he gets yiras Shemayim from people, when he gets requests, beseeching from people in times of need, that's very special to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a recognition that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Bari Olam. There's nothing more precious to Hashem than that. He collects and stores those tears. He collects and stores those prayers right next to his Kisei HaKavod. The Gemara learns out from this pasuk that we just read, Elokai ekra yoma v'lo saneh v'layla v'lo dumi oli. We learn out of halacha. Amul Rabbi Yirmiyah, I heard this myself. L'didi mifarshli minei Rabbi Chia Barabba. I heard this explanation myself from Rabbi Chia Barabba. And this is where we're supposed to learn out over here, that we have a chiyuv to go and say and repeat the Megillah both by the nighttime and by the daytime. So we can learn even halacha l'maisa out over here. The kapitel is a beautiful kapitel. It's worth hours to go through line by line. I'll just point out one last point. If you look in Pasuk Zayin and Ches over here in the kapitel, in Pasuk Zayin it says, V'anochi solas v'lo ish cherpas odom uvezuyom. David HaMelech is talking over here and saying, I'm a nothing. I'm a gurnished. I'm worth nothing. Avram Avinu said, Anochi offer v'efer. Humbleness and understanding that we don't have a right to demand anything from Hashem. We can't demand from Hashem saying a person's a great person, a good person. We demand that they have a refuah shelaima. We recognize that we don't understand Hashem's plan. And we have to say as part of our tefillos, Tziduk Hadin, we always accept Hashem's din on us with righteousness, with acceptance. We accept Yisurim Shalava. And at the same time, we always look for the strangest places for salvation. In Pasuk Ches it says, Kol ro'ay aliguli, yavtiru v'sofa yoni rosh. He says, all those that saw me, David HaMelech said, when he was running away from Avshalom, his own son rebelled against him. And he says that everybody was scoffing and laughing at me. So some of the Mefarshim bring down that this is an allusion to Shimi ben Gera. Shimi ben Gera was the head of the Sanhedrin. And Shimi ben Gera cursed him a klolo nimretzes. He gave him a horrible curse. He called him an adulterer. He called him all sorts of terrible things. He said, now God's getting you. You ran away. You're forced to run away because Hashem is finally giving it back to you for all the sins that you did, David HaMelech. Shimi ben Gera was a great person, but unfortunately, he did terrible things here on the rebellion with Avshalom, and he cursed David. And David didn't, when he came back, did not take it out on Shimi. He told Shlomo, his son, you take care of Shimi. But David HaMelech himself didn't go and take care of Shimi. Who was Shimi's descendant? Mordechai. Ben Shimi, ben Kish, Ishimini. Mordechai himself was a descendant from that line. Yeshua's salvations can come from the strangest of all places. Yemiyat Hashem, while learning this kapitel of Tehillim, this entire beautiful project, it should be a refuah shelaima for Sara Drach, Sara Rivka bas Mindel. May all those who learn this bring an aliyah as well for the neshama of my mother-in-law, Ethel Korn, Esther Ettel, Zalman Yosef.